I'm here today to check this video by legendary drops about the fall of Polygon. Some of you, dear viewers, will already know, but for those that don't, Polygon is one of those quote-unquote gaming journalism websites, which in the recent decade or so, seems to have devolved into, well, a mess. I have many more words, but I'd rather don't get vulgar, and I want to see what Legendary here has to say. A link to the video and other info will be in the video description. Without further ado, let's have a look, shall we?
They played themselves. Simple as that. You know, we've been following the decline of games media on this channel for over a year now, and it's because I find it absolutely fascinating. Because from my perspective, these guys have all the tools at their disposal to be as successful as possible. Far more successful than I could ever be, but they don't wield it with any real conviction. In most cases, it's wielded with ego more than anything else.
Indeed, what gaming journalism has been doing in these years may very well be recognized as a gigantic act of self-sabotage. They had everything to succeed. People wanted them to succeed, yet, for some odd reason, game journalists seemingly turned on their very own customers.
They have the access, they have the experience, they have the pipelines, the platform. They used to have the audience, but they don't have that anymore. The reader, the gamer, the people that they need to be able to have a job in the first place, they became insignificant to them, or an enemy in some cases. And when you turn your back on the people that keep you employed, well, you find yourself unemployed. Odd how that works.
Usually the employees would be the ones that need to put up with obnoxious customers. Here, the situation has somehow reversed. We, the customers, had to put up with being called so many horrible labels: racist, gooner, istophobe, the list goes on, and on, and on. Patience is a limited resource, and as these journalists and outlets kept taking it away from us, they finally seem to have realized that this well is running dry, and as their buckets go down only to find ground, so do their company's revenue, which kept plummeting as less and less people gave a damn about activists disguised as fellow game enthusiasts.
Polygon is the latest to fall, and I think they're emblematic because in a lot of cases they represent the meme of the journalists that hate the gamers. Well, not all of them, just the ones that they disagree with, which just so happens to be the vast majority of them, which doesn't work out very well for them. But, you know, talented writers know how to cross that bridge. They know that you can still communicate and find ways to communicate with an audience that you disagree with. But Polygon is the best example of what happens when you turn your back on them entirely or you take up arms against them. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about the fall of Polygon. I want to talk about the continued death throes of legacy media, but I still think written media has value. A diversity of opinions and platforms is necessary.
I do agree that competition, alternatives, are necessary. After all, if we didn't have this kind of diversity, we'd only end up exchanging one echo chamber for another. I think it's important to have a multitude of views, but it's an issue to have it the way these outlets handled it, antagonizing people, and then, basically becoming rage baiters to farm clicks. How pathetic.
But that would require for games media to be relatable and to start delivering value. And I don't see that happening.
Well, neither do I.
Polygon has been sold off to Valnet. Most of its staff has been laid off. Only a few senior staff remain. May their Doom 2016 gameplay video live on as a testament to their contributions to this industry.
What an unfortunate day, to be reminded of that travesty. May their lack of aim be the epitaph on their gravestone, on which we shall take a collective piss.
While it may come as a shock to some, it shouldn't, especially given how severe the layoffs have been across gaming media. Anyone who's been paying attention could have seen this coming. The entire writing staff announced their exits on Blue Sky, which tells you everything that you need to know. And in the eyes of many gamers, this wasn't a tragedy, it was a long overdue correction.
As I mentioned, they've been antagonizing us for years. This was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And, after they talked so badly of us, no wonder we are jubilant of their failure. So many of us are feeling so vindicated right now.
I'm just gonna say it, nobody reads gaming articles like they used to. I've documented this decline before, but it's worth reiterating just how far these platforms have fallen. Legacy sites like IGN, Kotaku, PC Gamer, GameSpot, Polygon, all of them started their descent around 2014. And they had a steep decline after 2018 that they never bounced back from. In the eyes of the players, these sites have stopped being informative. They've stopped being relatable. They started pushing wedge issues, parroting PR talking points, and outright alienating the very people who once supported them. Most articles now feel like sanitized marketing, or worse, ideological messaging wrapped in clickbait headlines. And
they had so much goodwill, and they managed to squander all of it. Many now either don't care or outright want to see them fail. to see them pay the price for the foolishness that is going at war against those whose money your livelihood depends on.
Year after year, we've watched as these sites have consolidated, laid off, or pivoted to something completely irrelevant in a desperate attempt to stay relevant. And I think that no other outlet better represents that downfall than Polygon. When Polygon launched in 2012, it was ambitious. They wanted to be more than just a review site. They wanted to set a standard, uncensored opinions, long-form journalism, video documentaries, cultural think pieces, and for a while, it worked. Their earlier reviews were sharp, polished, and well-written. They gave you far more than you asked for, but you read it anyway because it was damn good content. In a lot of ways, some of their earlier writing reflects what we see in video reviews and commentary today, introspective takes on how playing a game makes you feel, what it reminds you of, what you wished other studios could learn from, and they had a solid pulse on what concerned players the most. But then there was a cultural shift, and Polygon just didn't shift with it. Instead, they veered off a cliff. The turning point came with Gamergate 2014, a controversial flashpoint in the industry that changed the tone of games media pretty much across the board. While some outlets were a little bit more cautious, Polygon went all in, leaning into this activist-adjacent, socially progressive lens that they began to frame every game through identity politics. Suddenly, the reviews weren't about what a game did well, they were about what it failed to represent.
That's the root of the issue, not tackling gaming news to fulfill the curiosity of the players, but putting out articles that were virtue signaling to peers about how invested the author was in this poignant issue, or straight-up hit pieces, aimed at shattering opposing views, values, and positions. It wasn't about giving the players factual information about games' releases, production, and performance anymore. It was about attacking them in the hopes to silence the dissenting voices, and maybe convert gullible people to their causes. No wonder this is not a sustainable business decision.
And I think their review of Bayonetta 2 is probably the best example of this, a mechanically brilliant action game, well loved and reviewed across the board. And they knocked it down to a 7.5 out of 10 because the reviewer didn't like how sexy the main character was. Not because of the gameplay, not because of the performance, because of problematic sexualization. This is the kind of scoring that doesn't just confuse people, it infuriates them. Polygon wasn't just judging the game, they were judging the player. While not saying it overtly, they were saying that this is the kind of content that shouldn't exist and you shouldn't be okay with liking it.
They really believed that they could act as moral authorities. The reality is that this was in line with their intentions, the objective. Enact change. Yep, change the entire gaming industry from the inside out by policing on what content is allowed, or even just acceptable, and what should be stigmatized and shunned together with the players that enjoy those kinds of content.
Then came their review of Kingdom Come Deliverance, where they called the game woefully bland and claimed that women in the game seem to only have three functions. They either perform as two-dimensional sex objects, fetch water from a river, or do needlepoint. Ignoring the setting, 15th century Bohemia, ignoring Teresa, the woman that saves your life, protects you, and then shares one of the most emotionally grounded relationships that are in the game, ignoring the historical context entirely because it didn't fit the narrative that they wanted to push.
It's surreal to me that they couldn't allow lack of diversity or gender disparities even when it was completely in context with what the game was depicting. This goes for games that wanted a more historically accurate setting, but this mentality also made it so game journalists would lash out at people that wanted to depict fantasy environments that were not quote-unquote as safe as something like Dragon Age Veilguard.
A game that prided itself on historical accuracy needed to bend itself to popular media trends and revisionism instead of just letting it exist as a contrast to how far we've come as people and as a civilization. I don't think these outlets or these writers understand the kind of damage that this approach does. Not only does it do damage to their own credibility, but it does it to the games themselves. Contrast matters. Games that are exploring historical themes or history itself should be able to present that world as it was, not as they wish it would have been. But rather than allow creative talent to stand on its own, the media often demands ideological conformity, filtering everything through modern social commentary. And when the game doesn't comply, they wield their platforms like weapons, shaming these developers, poisoning discourse, and trying to turn the audiences against them. Final Fantasy XVI went through the exact same thing. Square Enix wanted to tell a grounded Northern European...
They were more interested in manufacturing outrage for the sake of pushing their agenda and views than promoting good games that may have had a thing or two they didn't like. They wanted to shame the player for liking things they didn't approve and scare developers, studios, and executives into submission. You will have gay romance in your game. You need to have it. You will have body type 1 and 2 instead of male and female. even if all NPCs still keep calling your character a man. If body type 1 was selected, and a woman if body type 2 was your choice. Most of the time, these changes are not implemented even because the devs are so progressive. They are implemented because they feel they will face repercussions and harassment for not doing so. It really looks like the gaming media outlets have been complicit in a push to make it so these changes are not a choice, but a requirement.
An inspired fantasy story, but when the director explained that excessive diversity would conflict with the game's lore and tone, he was met with headlines like Final Fantasy XVI dev has a terrible answer for why the game is so white, or Final Fantasy XVI has no business abiding by historical realism.
Sure, he may have no business abiding by it, but that also means he has no business to not abide by it. Another attempt to morally coerce someone into implementing the vision that the journalists had.
This wasn't coverage, it was a correction, a demand that even fiction needs to submit to ideological vetting. I think that these developers should have the freedom to create without being publicly shamed for not fulfilling someone else's social agenda. Not every game has to represent everyone, and not every creative decision is a political statement. And to be fair, I can already hear the counter-argument that players have mounted pressure campaigns to pushing back against what they view as forced representation or initiatives that they don't agree with.
That means nothing though. Players are the pairs. They are the ones actually buying the games. Sure, top executives may push certain decisions and some studios may have their own visions, but it doesn't matter since no money means no funds. You can go to war with your players, but it's a war of attrition that you're never going to win, unless you appease enough of them to make it sustainable.
But there is a difference between market feedback and institutional pressure. One affects sales, the other shapes perception. The media controls how these games are framed and who sees them. When they start pushing ideology over insight, it stops being criticism and it starts becoming coercion. What the media never seems to be able to grasp is that this outrage cuts both ways. When they pressure studios to mold games into ideological statements, it creates a backlash, not just against that game, but the very idea that these games need to carry a message. Assassin's Creed Shadows, South of Midnight, Concord, they didn't draw fire in a vacuum. The media helped build the environment where these players now push back.
Of course. The media is like an arsonist spreading gasoline on a fire. They want whatever messaging they agree with to be the dominant one in the industry, and they come up with narratives that suit their vision for what the industry should be like. At the same time, they want people to be mad because it allows them to both get more clicks on their articles and posts, and work the outrage they create into their narratives by usually selecting the most outlandish and extreme comments or opinions, using them to paint everyone as extremists, out of their minds and full of hatred. Companies that use the ideas behind DEI, which are good in nature, to co-opt it into something to push their agendas are the main issue, but gaming media has been complicit in it for way too much time, and so openly too, to the point where it's impossible to deny any of this.
You kept shaping the discourse. Don't be surprised when the discourse shapes you right back. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I mean, this is the reason why Polygon and many of these other media outlets have lost their relevance over time, and it's because in the eyes of players, they have become an oppositional force that is using their platforms to pressure studios to make changes not for the players, but for themselves. And that's all been proven with recent statements made by Daniel Varva, the creator of Kingdom Come Deliverance. In a recent Czech interview, Kingdom Come creator Daniel Varva opened up about the impact Polygon and others had on him after the first game. He said that it felt like there was a sword of Damocles hanging over his head, and he admitted he was very afraid that journalists would pull what they did with the first game on him again, complaining that the sequel wasn't very diverse and blah blah blah, to quote him directly. He talks about how he was afraid that they would scour his Facebook, auto-translate his political rants, and write up that he's now a Trumpist right-winger and against this and that. He talks about how that felt like a threat to him and how he was prepared to get fired over it.
1. That's fucked up. 2. It's Vavra. 3. You see? They want you to believe they operate for the greatest good, for inclusiveness, for equality, diversity. The reality is that they are selfish, narcissistic people that operate like a racket, their sanctimonious nature fueled by moral superiority in thinking that they're the only ones that are right, makes them believe that any action, no matter how scummy, is justified for their cause or even just for their careers. If you are a developer and your game has the misfortune to go viral and catch their eye, your social profiles will be scrutinized, going back even more than a decade, to see if you always held the right opinions, piss them off, and they will try to contact your employers, your business partners, supporters, and even your family in some cases. While I will probably never buy a game from Vavra, as he chose to bend to them and lie to his customers, For something stupid like adding a gay romance option in his game, an option with which I have no issues at all, given that I played Cyberpunk and Baldur's Gate 3 that give me way more than one measly option. I cannot fault the guy for being scared and choosing to shield himself from being harassed and stalked with the possibility of losing his job hanging over his head. This is exactly the reason for why these media outlets need to fail and for why so many were happy to know people that lost their jobs and are waiting for more websites to follow suit.
That is the legacy of Polygon, not just relevant articles, fear, self-censorship, development choices made out of survival, not creativity. You can have your opinions on Varva, the choices that he's made and the things that he said. However, this is what happens when coverage turns into punishment, when the writers think that they are moral arbiters instead of critics, when review sites become political weapons instead of industry observers. When the players see the media wield this sort of influence, when they see them fail to represent them, what do you think the end result of that is going to be? And it's not like they've only done this once, they've been doing it the entire time with articles like Yakuza examines masculinity with care but leaves women behind, God of War director on toxic masculinity and why Kratos has to change, gaming's toxic men, explained.
Jesus Christ, it's fine for games and studios to explore any of those things, just don't complain when the majority of people doesn't want a social commentary that pushes the boundaries to better society and goes to play an actual game where they can just shoot bad guys in the face, or a game that explores dark themes and features horrible things like torture without holding anything back.
Why are game companies so afraid of politics in their games?
Yes, this is one big landmine. It's not afraid of politics, it's afraid of our politics in their games. If a game was something like that weird Alex Jones game with AAA level of production, these journalists would throw a fit and scramble to find anything bad to accuse the game or the devs of. At the same time, if your game is big and is an assured success and you don't include anything political at all in it, they'll still pull stuff like this because you didn't use your huge platform to support them and their views. Again, it's not a general question, but it's a double-faced lie. They want you, your studio, and your games to be their mouthpiece and nobody else's.
You watch as their coverage turns from criticizing the industry to criticizing the audience for not agreeing with them. At first, it's a couple of studios that are the issue, and then it's everyone except them is the issue. And you can't expect your readers to want to stick around for that, nor be supportive of you or your industry. I mean, at a certain point, you have to wonder who they're even writing for, because clearly it isn't for the player, because the average gamer is not looking to be scolded, psychoanalyzed, or accused of moral failure every time they load up a title that doesn't match with the editor's worldview. But that's what much of their writing has become, a performance of superiority that's aimed at the very people that they need to stay in business. Instead of cultivating a community, they treated them like they were an obstacle. Instead of insight, they're offering disdain. You cannot insult your readers, ignore their values, and then act surprised when they stop showing up. I mean, look at one of the articles that they wrote this year. These video games kill fascists, cathartic video games to get your anger out in a healthy way. Listen, I'm all about staying abreast on current events, but watching the fascist white cis hetero patriarchy put boots on the necks of anyone they want gets old fast.
Dear Lord, just look at that word salad. Label, 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 and another label for good measure, all the while supporting the kind of behavior that has people punch and screech at each other over politics. It's unhinged. I wish it was this one journalist and this article alone, but you have all seen the examples, and I am afraid to tell you, there are plenty more floating around websites like the Mary Sue, the Gamer, and so on.
If you feel like dismantling the systems of oppression with wanton destruction, these games provide the sweet feeling you get from bringing the ruling class down a peg. Bro, what the fuck is this? Have you ever thought about the fact that the vast majority of the gaming audience doesn't tune into this, likely aren't even paying attention to politics, and they see this extreme rhetoric and honestly veiled call for violence as weird and uncomfortable as hell? You write something like this, you publish this under the banner of a games journalism outlet, and then you wonder why you're sold off and your staff is laid off. You alienated your audience, you scared developers into silence, you turned your platform into a weapon, then you pointed it at the very industry that once embraced you. And for what? Look, let me be clear, there are hardworking people in games media who don't buy into any of this. Talented writers that just want to talk about games, who care about storytelling, systems, and creativity.
God bless them. Allah, Papa Jones, I don't care, may they be blessed with good fortune and wealth because the industry seriously needs them. Well, the AAA industry. Luckily the AA and indie scene is full of people that are creating things out of passion, and sure, many of the games they put out might not be my cup of tea or treat themes I don't resonate with, but at least they are free, they don't need to compromise because of bullies, and, most important, they don't need to rake in billions to turn a profit because their games were made with hundreds of millions. Part of the AAA industry is in need of a reshaping, but the gaming industry as a whole has never been healthier.
But they have been drowned out, undermined by the loudest voices in the room, the ones who treat players like problems, developers like enemies, and their own platforms like a soapbox. This is how you kill an outlet. Congratulations, mission accomplished.
And good riddance.
You have a lot of these outlets and writers that are talking at people and not with them, while also at the exact same time being completely detached from reality, which does not help their situation whatsoever. They're pressuring these games to be made, they're pressuring these changes to be made within these games that players aren't even asking for. They're making articles that the audience and the readers aren't even looking for. Look, man, I am not here for marching orders, I am here for gaming news, and if that's not what you're going to give to me, then I have no reason to be here. That's what's happening right now. You know, I'll be honest, I had no idea the Polygon was this bad. I had no clue. I haven't really read them in a long time. I usually stick to Insider Gaming because they stick to the news and they have some pretty good writers, but I started going through their article history and they have some talented people, really talented people. There's some good stuff that they write, but the human eye is trained to find things that don't belong, and there is a lot that doesn't belong on Polygon or on the internet at all, to be honest with you. But you find yourself asking, who is this stuff even being written for? And even more so, why would you even think it's tasteful to post some of this stuff? And I know people want to point out the writers, and they are the ones that are writing it, but you have editors. How did you have jobs? You don't have them anymore, but how did you have jobs? You should have known not to be posting this kind of stuff. You should have known that's going to drive people away.
That's another issue, the fact that it's unclear how deep this mentality goes. It clearly isn't just the journalists, so also the editors? Maybe the entire department for gaming? That's why people want every single one of them to be out of a job and never do anything again associated with gaming. Sure, I'll wish them good luck in whatever new business career they will pursue, but I don't want to see a single one near the gaming industry again because their actions have been nothing but poison for the AAA side of it.
You know, I think in a lot of ways it's just social immaturity. That if you disagree with someone on anything, they have to be the enemy. End of story. That's just where this goes. And you can't include their perspective in good faith because, well, it has to be vilified. It has to be demonized. And you're not going to keep an audience that way. And you're definitely not going to be making any money that way. And I think that the industry... I think that these outlets did the same thing that the industry essentially did, which is post-Gamergate, they abandoned the initial audience that they had and searched for this wider audience that they believed that was out there that had shared values.
Ah, yes, that must be the ever so elusive modern audience I heard so much about.
But it just doesn't exist. That's just not out there.
Oh.
You know, they have to come to the sobering reality that no matter how much you don't agree with your audience, how vile, how vitriolic, how abhorrent they are, you have to find a middle ground with them. That's it. You have to find a way to be able to reach them. And I know that people are going to point it out and say, well, oh, LD, look how the gaming audience is. These guys do the exact same thing. They pressure these companies. They use social controversy and things of that sort. It doesn't matter. Guys, I'm just going to tell you, I'm just going to tell it to you straight. They're the ones that are paying. They're the ones that you need their attention. So either you figure out a way to be able to reach them, or you are reaching for a job application.
He's so right about this. It's not rocket science. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. That hand is not your employer, but it's ours, the average player. You've got the choice to appease them or appease yourselves, sure, but only one of those choices will ensure your career and keep food on your table.
That's it. You know, that's the thing. The media has just continued to fail to adapt to a lot of these different cultural changes. Even the way that media has been consumed over the years, a lot of that has changed. They haven't adapted to any of that. And from my perspective, while it might be Polygon today, I think they're all going to be Polygon tomorrow. I'm sorry. Guys, we aren't just losing Polygon, we are starting to lose all of them. In an article written by Christopher Dring titled, "The number of video game articles dropped by over 100,000 in Q1, he writes, The top 135 video game websites published over 635 articles in Q1 this year, Press Engine data reveals. That's a drop of over 13%, or more than 100,000 articles compared to the same period in 2024.
In other words, the world is healing.
That number covers reviews, news, guides, features, and code pages, and includes websites from all around the world. A lot of the biggest drops were at guide-based productions, but there were also big declines amongst major media outlets, including IGN, GameSpot, Famitsu, and Eurogamer.
While these were not the worst, they also definitely had articles that echoed similar nonsense, albeit once in a while.
The reason for this decline is no big surprise. According to Press Engine, it has seen 2,902 press contacts disappear from its database over the past 2 years. Those press contacts include amateur, part-time, and freelance journalists, but it ultimately highlights a significant drop in people writing about video games, with redundancies having hit almost every major media publication. There are other factors that are influencing the drop in video game articles, including a continued shift towards covering the biggest titles, a decision driven by changes to Google's search engine. 100,000 fewer articles and nearly 3,000 fewer press contacts is a dramatic shift, but let's not pretend like this is coming out of nowhere. That 13% is a symptom, not a disease. The audience is gone, the content isn't landing, and thanks to the changes in Google's search algorithms prioritizing the biggest names, unless you're IGN, Forbes, or PC Gamer, you're basically invisible. And even then, you have to wonder, who's even reading this stuff? I'm not even saying that to be cruel, but I would be hard-pressed to name more than a dozen gaming outlets off the top of my head, let alone 135.
That's way too many gaming media outlets. Wow. Forget splitting the pie, there's too many parasites at the table.
And that's coming from somebody who actually reads this stuff. But then again, what would those missing articles have been about? While some are going to be shocked by this sudden drop, I'm definitely not. I'm wondering who's actually going to miss them. We don't need 15 articles all regurgitating the exact same press release. I've joked about this before, the media using return to form like it's a summoning spell every time a new game that they like flops, but that's the reality. The same quote, same take, same structure. Barely any variation. Take the Grand Theft Auto 6 delay. It was everywhere, but not a single outlet provided anything beyond the basic announcement. No exploration of Take-Two stock dropping, no discussions about how the pressure to meet earnings forecasts could shape Rockstar's internal decisions or set a precedent across the industry. Just the same surface-level reporting echoed across a dozen sites. That's not journalism, that's a carbon copy feedback loop designed to farm SEO. And of course it is, because it's all just a pipeline for ads. It's no surprise that players are tuning out. Most of these sites are unreadable without an ad blocker, autoplay videos that are blaring over text, walls of pop-ups that choke out the content. Even if you do manage to navigate that minefield, half the time a paywall is going to slam down on you mid-scroll.
It all reeks of desperation. These are not companies one can make a career into, they are sinking ships.
It's not just bad, it's an actively hostile environment for readers. So players are going elsewhere. They're turning to YouTube and streamers, Twitter and Reddit, TikTok, wherever else they can go, because at least those people are talking to them, not down to them. At least they're entertaining. At least they're authentic. At least they respect your time. You can throw a video on in the background, let it ride while you're at work or you're commuting, and you can get an actual discussion, not a barely rewritten press release that's covered in ads.
At least those streamers feel like individuals that people can relate to. They may hold wildly different values and views, but at the very least, they're not constantly trying to shame you. They feel, because most of them are, like gamers just like you and me, and some of them, like Baldo, aren't afraid to show how much of a mess they can be.
Which honestly, that makes this all the more baffling that these outlets have not adapted. Videos should be their strong suit. They already write this kind of content. They should turn it into a script, do a voiceover, add some footage, post it to YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, anywhere. There is no excuse. You know, I was stunned to realize that I am catching up to Kotaku in YouTube subscribers. Me, a guy that's making videos in his spare time, closing the gap on an outlet that's been around since 2004. Polygon has 1.4 million subscribers, and sure, some of their videos actually get some pretty solid views, but they only post once or twice a month, and when they do, it's stuff that people didn't even ask for, like a lore video or a lore breakdown video on how Avowed does lore better than everybody else, a game that's already fading from memory and was widely criticized for being bad at lore. I mean, the business side of me is genuinely frustrated that these guys are sitting on a gold mine of content and they are wasting it. Skill Up and Gamer Ranks write articles and newsletters and then they turn it into content. Why can't they? They write multiple articles a week, convert them into videos, double dip. Instead, they cry about AI stealing their jobs and sue OpenAI, even though half of their writers are probably using ChatGPT behind the scenes to meet their deadlines by spinning up slightly different versions of what everybody else has already written. The truth is, there is no outside force that's killing them. Not AI, not YouTubers, not Google. It's their own lack of adaptability, their own lack of relatability. That's what's actually eating these guys alive. This collapse is total and it's systemic. It's not just a few bad outlets or a couple controversial takes. It's not just Polygon or Kotaku that's writing things that nobody cares about. It's an entire media apparatus out of step with the players, out of touch with developers, and completely unprepared for how media consumption has evolved. And they haven't just failed to adapt, they've doubled down on the very behaviors that is driving audiences away in the first place. Instead of reflecting, learning from the failures of their peers, they are lashing out. Instead of reporting, they are correcting. Look no further than PC Gamer's roundup of 2024's biggest gaming controversies. They boiled down the criticisms of Assassin's Creed Shadows just to outrage over Yasuke, as if concerns about historical authenticity were conjured out of nowhere, definitely not brought up by Ubisoft themselves.
Let's be real here, most of the quote-unquote controversy for Assassin's Creed Shadows revolved around Yasuke. There were also claims of historical inaccuracies due to Ubisoft's statements about how the game would try to be more accurate, but after that, I think many kept pressing on the Yasuke matter alone. Meanwhile, there were so many other instances of historical inaccuracies, sloppy implementation of Japanese culture, and, from the material shown and the trailers, there were many clearly unpolished things gameplay-wise. To sum it all up, despite some people definitely fixating on the Yasuke issue out of historical inaccuracy, or because they wanted a Japanese main character instead of someone that was clearly put in because of a fad, the game sucks a slightly bit more because of Yasuke, but the title all around it's just bland, pure slop.
They ignored valid conversations, and by doing so, they poisoned the well. Then there was their response to Black Myth Wukong when Game Science didn't apologize for some loose allegations that were made against them. PC Gamer wrote, "Naturally, the usual parts of the Twitter sphere were thrilled to see a developer being so based, especially since Black Myth Wukong was a hit. Proof positive that real gamers don't want politics in their games or some such." Others viewed the whole thing more as just strange and a little creepy.
Is it strange and creepy to find developers that will not bend to media and social pressure? This disingenuousness is another big piece in the puzzle that is their utter failure.
Then they finished with saying, "It's hard not to read the silence as a sign that Game Science feels it has nothing to apologize for." Yeah, maybe that's because they don't actually have anything to apologize for. Maybe not every developer needs to pass a moral purity test before they're allowed to ship a game. Maybe some of these studios just want to make something cool without having to grovel for forgiveness for every manufactured scandal, but instead of respecting that, the media wants to treat silence like it's an admission of guilt. And this kind of behavior is everywhere. Bias is embedded into everything. Contempt for the audience is on full display. They retreat to places like Blue Sky to avoid feedback, posting articles like gamers are terrible people and we should stop being okay with it, only to follow it up later with it's time to start trusting video game reviewers.
I can't properly express, even without this speech software, how bad it looks to write articles demonizing the audience while writing others about propping themselves up as saviors or unsung heroes.
Yeah, that trust is not coming back. Not after years of talking down to players, punishing developers, and turning the medium built on creativity into a battleground for personal agendas. Polygon's collapse is not an isolated failure. It's a forecast. And it's a warning sign for all of these outlets still pretending like they have a voice of authority while the audience is quietly walking away. You don't get to ignore the people that you claim to speak for. You don't get to mock the community, miss the story, and still expect to be relevant. You either evolve or you fade out.
Could not have said it any better.
For most of them, they already have. The press didn't lose the audience, they pushed them away. And now they're watching the lights go out, one outlet at a time. Now this may sound crazy, but games journalism isn't dead. The reason why I say that is because I can bring up an article, I can cite it, I can read it word for word, and people will still engage. People will still watch the video, they'll enjoy it, they'll be entertained by it, they'll hear my opinion, the opinion of the writer, they'll come to their own opinion because it's an open dialogue, not a sermon. With so many of these outlets wanting to educate audiences instead of inform them, it's no surprise why nobody wants to listen to them. You know, we can have a conversation about how women are portrayed in games, or diversity in games, or whatever the hell else you want to talk about. We can do that without having to vilify the audience that you're trying to reach in the first place. It doesn't make any sense. I brought it up. The ESA reported in 2023 that 53% of gamers in the US alone are men. 72% of them are white. It is not an effective strategy to vilify a large subsection of the audience that supports you or your industry.
Sounds so bloody obvious. The only reason they must have done what they've done is because they're deaf.
This isn't ideology, it's just math. You can reach these people, you can talk to them, and in most cases, they'll be willing to listen. But the minute that you start using buzzwords and catchphrases and try to bring politics into the conversation is the minute that their minds turn off. They turn away from the conversation. It's not an effective way to run a business, and it is definitely not an effective way to have a conversation. These are things that these guys should be professionals at. Beyond that, written media, that's really what's dying out. And some of it has to do with attention span. Some of it has to do with a lot of the ads that are on some of these sites. You know, most of these sites don't even have a dark mode. That's so aggressive. Like, it hurts my eyes, man. Why do you do this to me? You know, if it's not on Twitter or Reddit, most people aren't going to be reading it. In a lot of cases, they're getting most of their information from YouTube videos more than anything else. You have to adapt. You have to capitalize on that. And you have to do anything other than what you're doing right now.
No, please, do not tell them to do anything. Just tell them exactly what to do. Maybe, just maybe, they will finally have enough brains to understand that this is all we ever wanted and nothing more was needed.
Because it's not working. And to be honest with you, I don't really want all of them to go. I've said this multiple times. There's tons of writers that I like. And the minute that some of these folks start to wake up to some of this stuff is the minute things can get a little bit better. And I genuinely hope that they do. So hopefully some writers found a gleam of solid information in here, or a little bit of advice that they might take into their writing, or maybe they take into their YouTube career, or whatever it might be. Who knows? Thank you guys for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video, share the video, like the video, comment down below. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel so that I can go past Kotaku.
Go and subscribe right now to Legendary Drops. As you can see, the guy is a treasure and, clearly, is not a grifter and wants to simply see the AAA industry and, more in general, gaming be in a better place. A link to his channel and this video will be in the description.
Outside of that, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Catch me on Twitch, and I'll smell you guys later. Peace.
Family, 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 family.
I clearly appreciated this video and agree with a lot of his points. Again, the state that the media outlets are in like now, with the exception of the bigger fishes, is a mess entirely of their own making. I still find mind-boggling how they could so consistently make one bad decision after the other. They bit the hands that used to feed them. They chose to pose as moral arbiters for what should and shouldn't be allowed in gaming. They used intimidating tactics towards voices of dissent regardless if it's just a random gamer on the internet or a developer. Then they go and act surprised that everybody hates them and nobody is giving them any clicks anymore. Funny how that happens, huh? Anyway, if I managed to keep your attention up to this point, I thank you for listening and I hope I will see you in my next upload. I hope this video was to your liking, and if so, please like and subscribe, and if not, do leave a dislike. That helps too. Peace.